Thank you, Diane. Good evening, everybody. Can you hear me okay? Yeah, great. Thank you for being here. Diane, thank you for inviting Stu and I to talk tonight. Couple things. I always have to give credit where credit's due. This beautiful slide presentation, Stu did all the heavy lifting. He did it all, 100%. And I also want to applaud his patience in working with me. So our friendship is once again tested, but I think has persevered, okay? I'm also happy to say that at the end of the lecture tonight, we have some exciting information that we only got on Monday evening. And when you're researching, it doesn't always happen like that. Sometimes it takes years for you to obtain what you've been looking for. But a little miracle happened on Monday night, and I will be sharing that information with you. No, it's not the winning lottery ticket. Also, I just want to add that I do not work for a railroad. I never have. I did not grow up in Park City. I didn't live here when the trains ran. So, and research is always a work in progress. You're always learning new stuff. So, Stu and I like to say the information we're covering tonight is always subject to interpretation. We also believe in participatory lectures, like a participatory theater. There's some people in this room tonight, I know very well, who grew up in Park City, who lived here when the trains still ran. And so if you don't hesitate, if you want to add additional color based upon your personal experiences of growing up in Park City during those formative years when Union Pacific still served the town. Couple questions for the audience. Does anyone and has anyone worked for a railroad company? All right, there we go. So they automatically know more than I do. And how about those who lived in town when the trains still served town? Oh yeah, we got a great show of hands here. All right, perfect. Right, as you know, there were two railroads that served Park City. Union Pacific was the first to arrive. They did in 1880, and though we'll talk a little bit more detail about them, they would serve town for over 100 years. The Denver and Rio Grande, or actually the Salt Lake and Eastern, arrived in 1889. They ran into financial trouble. They were purchased by the Denver and Rio Grande, and they served Park City until 1947. So that was a period of 58 years. As it relates to the agenda tonight, there's going to be two parts. As you can tell, I'm doing the introduction, and soon I will turn it over to Stuart Stanek. But in the first part, which Stu is going to talk about, he's going to discuss the state of affairs as it relates to Park City's economy, really circa 1940 to 1986. And he will investigate the town's ultimate conversion to an economy powered by the greatest snow on Earth. However, the transition to that economic miracle didn't happen like that. But he is going to go into an interesting bit about three nefarious, conniving brothers and one bad dictator who accelerated the transition from mineral extraction to mining. So it's a great part of the talk. And then my part of the talk, which is the second half, will deal with the circumstances associated with the last train to Park City. And next slide. All right, we did give an echo flavor of this last week. And I have to say, there was some confusion because there were a variety of people who attended the lecture who don't live in Park City. And I will condemn myself. I live in this Park City bubble. So I rarely venture more than 30 minutes away from Park City. So when I was asked questions by people from Hennifer, Colville, Hoytsville about the railroad infrastructure in their town, I couldn't tell them anything. So I was embarrassed. So anyway, this is a map of the Park City branch. It was also called the Park City, Maine. Here is Echo. Basically, it was 27 miles from Echo to Park City. I'm not going to read all the towns on the map. You can look at them. But I just want to make sure you understand that, or we want to make sure you understand that when we talk about the Park City branch in this lecture, we are talking about the connection between Echo and Park City and all points in between. Okay? Next. First of all, acknowledgments. Our lecture tonight is based upon input from all the people on this list. I am not going to take the time to read everybody because that would be unuseful. However, you can take a moment to look at the names on this list. Every single one of these people we either talked to on the phone or we met in person. And their fingerprints are actually throughout our lectures. So for everybody on this list and those not, thank you very much for your contributions to tonight's lecture. Next. For those of you who attended our lecture on February 27th of this year, that was the anniversary of the last passenger train to Park City, which was a winter excursion known in its later years as the Snowball Express, but in its early years known as the Hoot Spa Special. And anyway, we had an opportunity to meet these two gentlemen. They coincidentally rode that last train, and they shared with us their photographs and their stories of what it was like. Interesting, it was so successful, it sold out. The press was saying that, oh, it was so good, maybe we should run a summer excursion, and we're certainly going to do it next year, next winter. Well, that didn't happen. In May of 1971, Amtrak was formed. Union Pacific made a commitment to join them, and by joining Amtrak, you had to abandon all your passenger service, excursion or not. So, though people didn't know it, on February 27th, 1971, that would be the last passenger train to Park City. Next. All right, I think it's only fitting that I turn it over to Stu with a photograph from 1955 of the Park City local exiting the Union Pacific Main Line in Echo and just beginning its journey into town. As we can see, there's a lot of ore cars that they're taking into town to be filled up. And with that, Stu Stanek, go for it.
Thank you, David. I think actually this train is from 1956, and it's here because I was born that year. I know a lot of people think I was born way earlier, but it was actually 1956. Thank you, Diane, for inviting us. David, thank you for letting me ride along with your travel down the history books. There's probably almost everybody in the room knows more about mining than I do, but I did catch up pretty fast in researching this. And it's not so much to go in depth on mining, but it's more about relating to its impact on railroads and other business ventures in Utah and take a journey which takes us to the skiing economy. If you're going to talk about railroads in Park City, you probably have to talk about mining because the two are really interlinked. Mining has always been known as a boom and bust cycle business. Supply and demand drove pricing and exploration. So when you talk about mining, you know there were a lot of ups and downs. And the thought in Park City especially is that so goes mining, so goes the railroads, because they're intertwined. So in the 1940 period, Park City was already suffering through a decline. And then something happened over in Europe and across the Pacific, and that was World War II. Now, the government placed massive orders for things that needed lead and zinc and copper. There wasn't a lot of copper here, but it became very valuable. And with that, they built ammunition. They built bullets and bombs and rockets and whatever, and a lot of wiring, and then vehicles as well. However, when the war ended, a lot of those orders began to cease. The government did spend a period of time after the war replenishing their military inventories, but then that started to really go down. So about 1949, we were experiencing a lot of price decline and production decline here in Park City. Now I'm going to call on our friends at the railroad to take us on a journey of Park City ore production. Okay, so if you take World War II out of the equation, that was a very steep and slippery slope that was happening for mining here in Park City. But you can see the effect of World War II on that production, and you can also see kind of how fast it tailed off from there. Now, by 1949, there was a global decline in all needs for all metals, and in Park City that year, 875 miners were furloughed, were laid off. Now, there's only about 1,200 that lived here at the time, so that's quite an economic shock to the community. With production declining, it's no wonder that that miners started looking at other things they could do with the real estate they had built up there. This article was in the New York Times, October 11th, 1958. The article talked about declining prices for lead and zinc, and there had been a recent price rise, and somebody with the Utah Mining Association said, it's great that the price of these metals is going to go up, but it only means the mines are going to lose less money. So it wasn't a good scenario. So if you consider that Winter Park opened in 1936, and there had been other talk about skiing in town, the whole idea of skiing was something that the mining companies had already dabbled with even before 1958. And I found a couple that got all geared up and ready to go just in case. They're ready to go. You can see they've got their brand new skis, and they're excited for what might be in the future. Now, one of the bright spots in Park City mining came in the 60s, some 15 years or so after World War II. And that happened when Hecla Mining entered into a joint venture with New Park Mining Company to lease and operate the Mayflower mine, which brought an era of modernization to the Mayflower and gave it new hope. Now, in an article written by the illustrious Larry Warren, who is sitting in the second row center right here, thank you, Larry, for your quote. He said that the Mayflower mine was hot, wet, and full of gold. So this photo shows miners digging deep because they could use the Hecla investments that provided for more mechanized equipment, which allowed them to go down lower. These guys are already down at 3,000 feet in this picture. So the Mayflower became a modern mine. That's important to note. And there were many new improvements and techniques that were applied by Hecla to the mine. There was a $650,000 mill that was opened up to process ore. There was already a bunch of ore waiting to be processed, and this would be things like silver, gold, copper, lead, and zinc. All the minerals were coming out of the ground here in Park City. At first, the production was modest. There was 5 rail cars a week coming out of here. But unfortunately, it was really hot underground, and this is another issue. It was dangerous. Temperatures would exceed sometimes 140 degrees. So what used to be employed at the mine was something that pumped in cooler air from outside, and they would run it through the mine, and that would help. But Hecla turned on a 240-ton, I can't even imagine how big that is, chiller to keep miners safe and comfortable down at those lower levels. Now, they had some success at the Mayflower mine. It became the 6th largest gold producer in the country in 1966. And in 1967, they brought out 72,000 ounces of gold. I don't know what that's worth, but it seems like that's worth quite a bit of money. But in 1971, in a New Park annual report, they predicted that mining operations could not go beyond and into 1972. So one huge event happened here in Utah, and there was smelting and refining activities going on in Salt Lake City, and some of those facilities closed, and we'll go in a little more depth on that in a minute. But this was a real problem for the mines. So with gold just $64 an ounce at the time, the Mayflower closed. The pumps were turned off. The shafts were there, the gold was there, the other minerals were there, and all of it was underwater. Interestingly, the Mayflower was the second to the last to open and the last to shut down. Did I get that right, David? No.
Second, last to open is second.
Okay, I had that reversed. Last to open, second to the last to shut down. And then ultimately 4,000 acres was sold to a Dutch investment company And we all kind of know what's going on with that. Now, in business and a lot of other things, sports, there's a saying that says, timing is everything. I'm going to show you what happened to the price of gold in this time period, and I'm going to show you when the Mayflower closed. You know, whatever crystal ball they were looking at must have been kind of hazy because they didn't get a real clear look at the future. So obviously, it's really unfortunate. Would that have made mining stay on there? We don't know. I mean, probably people in the room have opinions on that, but talk about bad timing. But the success that they had at the Mayflower up to a point, and with the modernization that they did, there was another outfit in town that said, let's give this a shot. And that was a joint venture, which was a merger between Anaconda and American Smelting and Refining Companies. Many call it ASARCO or ASARCO. And they made a new entity called Park City Ventures. They jointly leased land from United Park City Mines. Initially, it was a 25-year lease, and they took out another 25-year option. So their view of the future was, wow, this is going to be great. We're going to be at this for 50 years. They began investing in a long list of initiatives, including they expanded areas where there were known ore zones. They installed larger mining cars to make more efficient transportation. They tripled the pumping capacity in the mines to remediate the water that was flowing in. I find it remarkable. There was a time in Park City where there was too much water. You know, we'd like to have some of that back right now. And they reopened and extended tunnels and rehabilitated buildings that were on the surface. So they put a lot into this situation. Now, in 1970, they produced 100,000 tons, but a shock came in 71 with those smelters and refineries closing, and again, a little bit more on that later. That meant that everything was going to be a little bit more expensive. So they ceased mining in 71, but they reopened the mines in 1973, and that year they committed to spending $17 million on investments inside the mine. In early 1976, they said, we're going to have a great year. This is a year that we're all really looking forward to. Everything we've done up to this point is really going to come to fruition. But that optimism dwindled, however, and in 1977, the mine was not producing enough to run at full capacity. In 1978, mining operations ceased. So the price tag on all of this ended up being $26 million. And if you do like, hey, Google, how much is that worth in 2025 dollars? That comes up to $153 million. And this story ran in the Park Record on January 19th, 1978. So this was some more bad news for the mining industry. Part of our story here will go to lands far away and then even farther, and then we'll make a big loop and we'll come back to Park City. But this is like the beginning of Star Wars in a land far, far away a long time ago. And this is a picture of an infamous character named H.L. Hunt, roughly, I think he was about 40 years old at the time. This is in Texas, circa 1930. He ended up finding a lot of wealth and oil in Texas. And the folklore, which I'd love to explore more someday, is that he parlayed poker winnings into a couple of leases, which came a few more leases, and that got his whole oil thing started. Hunt's first big deal in oil, and I'm talking a really big deal, is he invested in a oil find in East Texas from a really bizarre character named Dad Joyner. If you ever really want to have some fun, go down that rabbit hole sometime. He ended up buying almost all of the oil in East Texas for $1.3 million. Now, if you're Dad Joyner in East Texas in 1930, $1.3 million isn't too bad. And that's worth about, by the way, $24 million today. But what a bargain that it was the largest oil find in the continental United States at the time, and it goes on to be a massive producer. In the 40s, he got rich. In the 50s, he got even richer. And many people will say that he was the richest guy, richest person in America by the end of the 50s. He had 15 children by 3 different women, 2 of which he was married to at the same time. So he's an interesting character. Two of his children, three of his children became somewhat infamous. So now we go farther away from Park City, from Texas to Libya. Nelson Bunker Hunt, H.L. Hunt's son, said, let's go over to Libya and look for oil. And in the 50s and 60s, they had a bunch of success. Their primary focus was here in a place called the Sirte Basin. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. If you're in the back, it's Sirte. So that was very rich in oil, and this is where they were exploring. There's another thing that's famous about this region. An infamous character grew up there, Muammar Gaddafi. Now, what I found is if you do a Google search on, I want a sinister looking picture of Muammar Gaddafi, there's a gazillion results. This just happened to be my favorite. So this was really lucrative for the Hunts. They struck gold, so to speak. Muammar, though, wrested control of the country into his hands. He got rid of his adversaries, and he started to exert his influence. One of the first things he did is nationalize the Libyan oil fields. So some of them were nationalized a little bit, but with regard to the Hunts, he nationalized 51% of it. So it really, like, there's no reason for us to be here. It was a huge financial blow. They lost billions and billions and billions of dollars, 1970 billions, not today's billions. So the Hunts get wiped out. Other oil companies do too. So having been dealt this blow, the Hunts doubled down on a strategy that they had started on about 1970. They were going to go after a commodity and they were going to dominate it, and that commodity is silver. Now let's bring this back closer to Park City. They developed a multi-year plan, and they wanted to just control the silver market. Starting in the early 70s, they began accumulating more and more silver. In 71, the US dollar went off the gold standard. And because of that, the Hunts believed that A, the government would mismanage the currency, and B, there'd be an economic collapse. What could be a better way to sustain yourself during that than get into silver? By 1979, with their partners, they controlled 100 million ounces of silver, which is an astronomical number. Some of it physically, they had the physical silver, and a lot of it was with futures contracts. At that point in time, they owned 1/3 of the entire world supply of silver, except for that was owned by governments. So this is a really, really dominant position. Their strategy was so aggressive, they were doing highly leveraged future contracts on margin. What could go wrong with that, right? Because of the buying frenzy that they employed, in January of 1980, the price of silver hit just under $50 an ounce. So a massive, massive increase in the price of silver. And here's a representation of that. I start this chart in 75 when things kind of got going. And you can see that red dotted line there was the absolute peak price. This is averages here. So this is a be careful what you wish for scenario, because that could draw some scrutiny, which it did, from a guy named Paul Volcker. Paul Volcker was appointed the Fed chair in 1979 and inherited a bad economy, runaway inflation, a declining dollar, and the commodities markets were really in shambles. So the first thing Volcker did right away was increase the federal funds rate from 11% to 20%. Now, I suffered some pain at this time. This is the time that I got my first mortgage, and it was 12.75%. Ouch. And when I hear people complain about 6 or 7, I said, yeah, the old days, you would have no idea what happened back then. So as rates rose, borrowing became more expensive. That's kind of duh, that happens. But what he did was help cool the speculative mania that was going on in the metals markets. Silver prices having peaked in that January almost $50 range, in 2 months it declined to less than $11, $50 to $11. So there's a massive collapse for the commodities market, and there was a worldwide financial panic as a result of these guys. So federal regulators stepped in and said, we're going to change the margin rules on buying this kind of stuff, and we're going to limit the number of silver contracts that any individual can own. So this really, really put a crimp on the hunts. So they had to liquidate their positions. They had to liquidate fast, otherwise known as a fire sale. So here's a lesson. If you're asked to pose for a picture and you're doing this, it's not a good thing. Estimates say that the hunts lost $1.7 billion at that collapse of stuff they held in their bank accounts, and allegedly another $4 billion in paper profits. And that was about a $6 billion hit by converting it to today's dollars. They were investigated for market manipulation. They were found guilty in a federal court of conspiring to corner the silver market and forced to pay $134 million in damages. Now, Nelson Bunker Hunt on the right filed for personal bankruptcy in 1990, 2 years after the court ruling. He listed debts of $500 million and assets of only $100 million. Needless to say, this left the silver market to waste. It was completely destroyed, and the value of that metal, nobody really knew what it was. But if you're watching that ride up in 1979 in silver, you go, maybe we should be pulling some more silver out of the ground. So the silver price explosion brought Noranda Mining, a Canadian firm, to town, and they leased the Ontario mine. They spent $500,000 just to initiate the lease, and then they promised they had to spend another $1 million a year on the lease, and there was probably profit sharing and a few other things in there. And they did this right as the silver market was crashing. So this article in the Park Record was from February 28th, 1980, halfway between just about the highest price of silver and that March collapse in silver. So this article is very interesting because it seems like news gets stale right after it's printed, and this might be another one of those cases. So Noranda reported there was an estimated 8 million tons of ore remaining in the mine, and they hired 155 miners right as Paul Volcker started doing his thing. After losing $28 million, Noranda closed the mine in just 3 years, citing depressed metals market prices and sagging corporate revenues. This was in the Park Record on May 28th, 1981. This would be the end of mining in Park City as we know it. And all of this had to do in large part with what those bastard Hunt brothers were up to. Now, we mentioned a couple times the role of smelters and refiners in Salt Lake. Along with mining, smelters were very important, and as Park City mining got built out, so did railroad tracks, branches, and spurs to get closer to the mine so they could load the ore and transport it. Where did they transport it? In large part, they transported it to Midvale and Tooele, Utah, where there were smelters and refiners happening down there. If you go way back to 1890, a long way back, this is a long time ago scenario, Salt Lake was considered to be the smelting capital of the West. There was 10 smelters operating down there. So it was really significant, and everybody would agree, I think, that knew this business. If it wasn't for the smelters being in Salt Lake, Park City Mining would have never had the success that it had, because that's a really important aspect of this. But, there's always a but, smelters aren't very good neighbors. They spew out a lot of thick black smoke, and it's not very pleasant. It's like this. I'm going to bring it to local terms. Imagine your neighbor goes out and buys a smoker, and he likes to smoke a lot, and then multiply it by about 1 million times, and that's what it's like living next to a smelter. So they polluted everything around them. Farmers said they're spraying arsenic on my land. Cattle were dying, crops were being ruined, and it was just a very tough situation. The smelters got sued. They had to pay damages. They had to cease operations for a while. They had to do some remediation of the pollution that they were spewing out. But the smelters remained defiant, and this was a story in the Salt Lake Tribune in 1908, and it said, we're going to run as long as the ore comes in. So they said, to heck with you, we're going to keep going. The Midvale smelter continued on for a time, but in 1971, in the first half of the year, they lost $1 million on operations. And this would become a pivotal moment in Park City mining history. With this being closed down, it meant that all of the production that happened here in Park City would have to get shipped to a much farther away location, increasing costs a lot and making it much more difficult to do this. Not coincidentally, at this time is when the Mayflower mine shut down, and it's when the Ontario ceased operations for a period of time because this is such a blow to the industry. As it turns out, this business is a three-legged stool. The mines need smelters to process. The railroads need both as customers, and mines need smelters to process, and and they need railroads to ship. So one leg of the stool goes away, whether it's smelting, mining, or railroads, and there's a huge problem. So this became a difficult period of time in Park City mining. So now we're getting close to Utah again, and we're going to talk a little bit about Vernal because this has a boomerang effect on Park City as well. Governor Cal Rampton was elected for his first of 3 terms in 1965, and he became aware that in Vernal and the Uinta Basin, there was economic depression going on. There wasn't much commerce happening. There weren't a lot of jobs, and he went down to talk to them, and the local newspaper wrote a nice story about the governor coming down. Rampton at the time said that even though you don't have railroads around here, that won't condemn you. And Rampton thought that one of the things he could do to help Vernal was take a dive into tourism and bring some tourist dollars there. Rampton was a champion of, look, everybody, jump in your car, go out and see Utah, spend a little bit of money out there, and we will get paid handsomely for it because those people, you'll enjoy yourself, and the people there will enjoy the money you spend there. But at the time, Utah roads were, I should say, good Utah roads were sparse. So I tried to visualize what that might look like. I don't know if it was quite this bad, but that might represent some of the roads that were there. This story is about Rampton in a moment of glory, dedicating a new section of Highway 40 near Starvation Reservoir. And this was the lifeline to Vernal. And he did it in a rest area. So the governor has no clothes, and he's okay with doing that. So the tourism worked to a point. The National Dinosaur Monument was down there. And then in 1950, they started building the Flaming Gorge Dam. You can see construction photos here. And that opened for business in '64. So that was really good for tourism there because this was only 50 miles from Vernal. But Rampton also knew that this wasn't enough, and he wanted to see other things happen there. So as it happens, there was a large cache of phosphate around Vernal. After several years of analysis and construction, the San Francisco Chemical Company opened the mine in 1963, and it became very successful. In 10 years, it would be the largest phosphate-producing mines in the West. And ultimately, though, here's the other but for this, is the rock had to get somehow from here to Rock Springs, Wyoming, where there was a fertilizer plant. Now remember, there's no rail service there. Guess what railroad tracks would come into play here? And it would be railroad tracks right here in Park City. So with that solution in mind, they started using Highway 40 to haul all this stuff in here. There was a president of this company named D.L. King. They called him Scotty King. And he had really aggressive goals, and it was off to a great start. And in 1966, he said, we're going to ship 700,000 tons of phosphate rock to Park City. Now, the challenge at the time was, again, 40 wasn't in great shape, but the state had this rule for them, custom for them, which would allow them to haul 60 tons of rock in one truck. I was able to find a picture of what that looked like. But then they said, that's too much. They were in a fight with the feds, and So they lowered the maximum load to 43,000 tons. This probably is only 55 tons, but I couldn't find a bigger picture. So go back to Mr. King's prediction, 700,000 tons of rock coming to Park City. That's 16,000 truckloads a year. And it's 44 truckloads a day. But we've talked to people who were here at the time, remembered that, and it was just like constant. This stuff is driving by your place all day long, and they're on the roads. So it was very difficult. So anyway, it worked. And it's hard to believe that Park City is the closest facility for this, but the trucks did roll in. So phosphate became the focus of operations for the Park City branch. And there was a facility at Foston. Now, if you didn't know where or don't know where Foston is, neither did I, but essentially it is near the intersection of 248 and Browns Canyon Road, a little bit south of there. And we actually have a little aerial view of that we'll show you in a minute. With mining essentially over in Park City, there was only a trickle of activity there. So this would pick up activity at the branch and give it a purpose, and loading all this rock was the process. Here's a couple of great pictures of Foston, of the Foston area. The train on the right is coming through that little notch right there. On the right is the road that goes through Richardson Flats. You come up and over the top, and you can still see that little notch there. Well, again, we'll fly over that a little bit later with some footage. But it was a pretty cool deal, and it was open from 1965 to 1986. So that brings us to what we talked about earlier as the tipping point from mining to skiing in Park City. Edgar Stern sold his interest in the Park City ski area in the 70s, but he carved out some land to the south and southeast to potentially build another ski area. In 1976, he got financing, he got approval, and they began development of the Deer Valley ski area. He had a long and distinguished career in media. I won't hold that against him. In hotel and luxury resort operations. And he recruited people from that luxury industry to come and help build this resort. One of the people that he teamed with was a guy named Jim Nasikas, who was a legend in the luxury hotel business. He came in, and his fingerprints would touch all aspects of the Deer Valley Genesis. Now, Stern for a while lived in Aspen, and he saw what the effects of poor customer service and overcrowding would do to a ski experience. And he said, I bet we can do better than that. Here's a picture of Bob Wheaton up on Flagstaff Mountain right during the development period. This is right in that area where they were looking at plans and thinking about what this ski area would look like. You notice that there are no condos in the background at this point. So David and I were kind of curious. We know that there was a lot of losses and investments in mining. We kind of wondered if we could track how much money was spent on developing ski areas in Park City, specifically Park City and Deer Valley. There's no official record, like it's not posted somewhere. So we went a little bit around and to see what we could learn. And in the 70s, Telluride also transitioned from mining to skiing. And when they developed their ski area over there, they spent about $20 million. In a similar time frame, Big Sky up in Montana began operations in 73 with a major expansion in 81. And the stuff we see online corroborated pretty well, says about $40 million. And then the one who's most closely associated with events here in Park City would be Beaver Creek. It was completed 1 year before Deer Valley, and it was the luxury alternative to Vail, so very comparable sort of situation. And so our best guess, and it is a guess, but we have some evidence to believe that somewhere between 35 and 40 million was spent between Deer Valley and Park City in that time period to really launch skiing here. So December 26th, 1981 was the official opening of Deer Valley. There were repercussions across Park City and across the ski industry with what this new resort brought to skiing. it did live up to Edgar's saying, which was, if you don't go first class, don't make the trip. The ski industry was shocked because he's paying attention to grooming, he's paying attention to food, he's paying attention to customer service, and it was really quality from top to bottom. So we see this being that tipping point. This day in particular, perhaps, was the day that we became a resort and ski community. So now I'd like to show you what 44 years of progress brings to us. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to David in the immortal words of Ed McMahon. Here's David.
Thank you, Stu. All right, that was great. So yeah, so Deer Valley closed for the season, its first season in April of 1982, and Noranda closed in April of 1982. Mineral extraction in Park City as a town was done. Stu, oh, got to go back. This is about 25 years after the photo we had for Stu of the Park City local making the transition. You can see it's diesel powered on its way up. There is a phosphate car back there, and we do have some gondolas there. So get to my notes here. All right, Stu talked about the phosphate reload facility. You can still see the cuts along Richardson Flat Road that went to it. The phosphate facility has been obliterated by the development of townhomes and condos over there. One thing about the phosphate reload facility at this period of time, it represented 90% of the business on the Union Pacific branch. So you take that away, next. Anyway, here's this cut that Stu was talking about. Here's Richardson Flat Road. Here's the rail cut. And this loadout facility, there were several tracks there for both empties and filled cars. And it went out and connected with the Park City main and then headed out to Echo and then on to Rock Springs. So this was the last remaining significant customer on the Union Pacific branch. Next. All right, ominous news. January 1986. Severn Chemical announces that they are going to close the reload facility, and they intend to close it by that summer. And they are building a slurry pipeline from their phosphate mines in Vernal directly to their chemical plant or fertilizer plant in Rock Springs. A week later, Union Pacific announces that they are going to abandon or sell to a qualified buyer the Union Pacific Park City branch. Next. Well, 3 counties banded together to preserve and expand the branch. That was Wasatch County, Summit County, and Utah County. And they had big ambitions. And those ambitions were, they were going to build a short line railroad that would connect Ogden, Echo, Park City, Heber, and Provo at that period of time. And that sounds fantastical today, but it wasn't fantastical back then because a lot of the infrastructure existed. The only thing that they really had to build was a connection from Park City to Heber, which, in talking to people who were in the planning process, maybe 5 miles. So the total all-in cost, Union Pacific was asking $1.7 million for their 30 miles of track and 400 acres. And when you consider Park City real estate now, that doesn't seem so bad. Anyway, and then the total cost to build out and reconnect, I'm not talking about the shared trackage rights from Echo to Ogden, that probably would have been very difficult. But at least to reconnect with Provo and connect Park City, they were looking at about another $10 to $15 million, which would have been about $45 million today. And their vision was to use this as a combination tourist railroad for commuters and for freight. And they were going to build an industrial rail yard in Heber City that would be built out and served by rail. They just needed to raise the money. But they had the support of the governor, Norman Bangerter. They had the support of Orrin Hatch. They had the support of the state legislature. And between all those people, talk's cheap. And they didn't raise the money. And Union Pacific was very clear. They're like, you pay us, you can have it. You don't have the money, we're not a charity. Next. All right, 1986. Some good things are starting to happen for Park City Municipal. I'm not saying that good things hadn't been happening, but Miles Rademan, who became a city planner, he joins Park City Municipal in 1986. And about this time, it's been announced that UP is going to sell or abandon the branch. Miles hopes that the money is raised and it's preserved. However, he realizes that raising the money may not be possible. So when I got together with him, he said when he first heard about the situation, when he got here, he said, we've got to save it. And so, next. Another good thing happened for Park City at that time, kind of a dream team from a municipal government standpoint. Brad Olch was in the first of his 3 terms as mayor. Miles Rademan, as I mentioned, was the head of planning. Jennifer Harrington was the town's landscape architect. Sally Elliott was on the city council, and Marianne Cohn had just established the museum. So all these people are kind of together. Yes? Okay, but you worked on the rail trail. Yeah, so anyway, these people all came together and they had a shared vision. And in talking to all of them, they describe it as a team effort. They saw the value of preserving this. And for Miles, next. Yeah. We did a lecture a couple of years ago called A Tale of Two Ski Towns, Ketchum, Idaho, Park City. And we all know about Ketchum. Sun Valley opens in December 1936, world-class ski resort, and ultimately painted a future for what Park City could be. In 1986, Ketchum converted 20 miles of their abandoned Union Pacific spur to a rail trail. And that rail trail connects Bellevue, Haley, Ketchum, and Sun Valley. And it's non-motorized use like ours. And Miles met with the people there, and they explained that they had worked with an organization called the Rails to Trails Conservancy. And in 1983, through bipartisan legislation, the federal government passed a rail banking program, which allowed the preservation of transportation corridors for future use. Because everybody knew once something got sprawled and mauled, it ain't coming back. So the Rails to Trails, or the federal rail banking program since 1983 has preserved 26,000 miles of abandoned railroads, rights of way for future transportation use. Anyway, Park City worked with Rails to Trails Conservancy. They did their proposal. The Tri-County Rail Commission is trying to raise the money, but by the end of 1988, it was obvious they were not going to be able to do that. Next, sorry. So, Park City steps up. The rail is going to be preserved. The 116th, hold on. Oh. Apologies. The 116th Army Reserve Engineering Battalion would grade the roadbed. A company, before they did that, a company from Salt Lake City, A&K Railroad Materials, began removing the rails and ties in February of 1989, and they were all removed by July of that year. And again, Park City is on the quest and being successful to preserve that transportation corridor, and they were able to do so. And I would like to say that Sally Elliott was the project manager who worked with the Army to grade that roadbed. Sally, anything you want to say about that?
Fun.
Next. In October of 1992, our rail trail became the first rail trail in Utah's history. Think of it as a linear park. And they were also identified as being one of the first 500 rails to trails efforts in the United States. So I'd like to give a round of applause to everybody who worked on the, Sally, Mary Ann, come on. Next. And their vision was realized. And that is the transportation corridor. That's the former Union Pacific branch looking east and from Richardson Flat Road, actually from a drone above Richardson Flat Road. And now we're going to have a little video. And then don't worry, in the time we have left, we are actually going to see the last train to Park City.
I'm going to show you now where this building supply company is, which is right at that intersection of Browns Canyon and 248. Then we'll look to the south where the actual Foston loading facility is, and then we'll do a quick flyover of the whole operation.
There's the cut.
I think it was at one time, yeah. Still there. There you go.
Okay. I have been trying to get a hold of a gentleman for years. And I was like the abominable snowman or the Yeti or something, some rumor that he had been here by accident when the last train came to Park City. He called me Monday night and we had a wonderful conversation. He was 12 years old in June of 1986, living in Provo. And he and his father, especially his father, they were railroad buffs. They like to take pictures. And they decided to spend that day taking pictures in Weber Canyon of Union Pacific trains. And lo and behold, there comes the Park City Local. And they decide to follow it to Keatley. And they follow it to Keatley. And an engine is decoupled. They're doing their switching operations in Keatley. And this gentleman, his name is James Belmont. His email handle is Sir James. That's a separate story, but he's not knighted. Anyway, he's 12 years old. So the dad goes over and talks to the brakeman. And he says, yeah, we got to make a hop or run into Park City because there's a couple of empty cars at Anderson Lumber that we need to pick up. And the brakeman says to them, we believe this will be the last train that ever goes into Park City. So they're like, whoa. And so they decide to drive into town and wait for the train. And so this is a picture of the engine coming up towards Bonanza Avenue. You can see Silver Creek, Poison Creek, whatever anybody wants to call it. This is where the rail trail is today. And it's coming up through Prospector. Next. It's crossing Bonanza Avenue. The brakeman has to stand down there because there's no crossing, so a car doesn't hit it or something like that. Next. Now they're in Anderson Lumber. That is James' dad talking to the brakeman. And they're kind of, the way James said, it was like, it was remarkable how unremarkable it was. After 106 years of service, this is the last run into Park City. So they couple up these two empty cars. Next. They're getting ready to leave Anderson Lumber. I'm sure this is very familiar to everybody here. They're getting ready to leave. They're leaving. Next. And that's it.
And there's their house, and we have to see.
There you go, Salad.
One more.
So you saw the last train, so it's leaving. Do I have any more? Is that it? Oh, yep, that's it. That's the last photo of any train that came into Park City. So anyway, that is our lecture tonight. Thank you. Oh, there's one thing I want to say. We do have some people in here that have great history from a railroad standpoint with Park City. Alan Dearden and Marion McGuire, they're in the back. Their dad, Fay Dearden, was a Union Pacific station agent from 1957 to 1978. They're standing when the station closed. The station was built in 1886 and would serve Park City until 1978. So their dad had a terrific 40-year career with Union Pacific. And if you have any questions about what it was like to grow up in an active railroad depot, they can tell you, because they lived on the second floor. Their dad's office and the facilities for the station were on the first floor, and they've been terrific for me to work with. So thank you so much for being here. And you know, as I mentioned, Sally Elliott played a key role, as did Marianne Cohn, on the creation of the rail trail. So if you have any questions for them, please ask them. And thank you.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thanks for coming. It's a lot of fun.